Hello, everyone. It's Kate Stillman with Yogahealer and Yoga Health Coaching, and I'm here with epigenetics coach David Krantz of david-krantz.com. And so, David, you've been you've become a certified epigenetics coach and sought after consultant in the areas of individualized genetic-based nutrition and the cannabinoid. How do you say it? Cannabinoid. Is that right?
Cannabinoid, yeah.
Cannabinoid. I know I'm saying it wrong. And so that's cannabis, everyone, that we're talking about there, and understanding that system. So you were also nominated in 2019 as a top 100 health innovator by the International Forum for Healthcare Advancement. And you're known for helping creative professionals take mastery over their well-being. So I was on your site last night and I was watching the endocannabinoid. How'd I do? Better?
Oh yeah, that's it.
Big improvement. And watching your video about that, basically about how weed affects people differently, and when people do their genetic testing, whether it's like a 1, 2, 3 and me kit or something, but then they get it unpacked in terms of understanding how things like coffee affect people differently, and how it might affect an individual, how it might increase certain disease markers. The example you gave in coffee was around heart condition, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and then different ways that weed affects people in terms of a certain gene. And so I just love to hear a little bit more. I mean, I've been talking more with epigeneticists and just around how medicine and diet is becoming so highly personalized. And there's almost this sense of it's interesting for me as and I'll let you speak in a minute because I know it's taking me a long time to get it out, but I just want to get it out. There's this thing like when Ayurvedic medicine, which is the medicine of the people for the people, that just understands the elements and also understands the unique individual, right? So there's already a lot of individuation with it. When we look at what happened when Ayurveda went to the West, it became super narcissistic, right? Where everyone's like, what's my dosha? It's not like, let me understand the universe and where I fall in it, in the whole. It was like, I'm so special. Who am I? And the more I'm talking with epigeneticists and people that understand genetic-based nutrition, it's kind of sounding like if you have, a fat pile of cash and can get genetic testing and have your epigenetic coach, you can finally figure out who you are and how to eat here on planet Earth. And it just feels to me really and I get the value of it, and I want to do it too. So that's the interesting thing, right? It's on one level, I'm like, oh, I'm going to totally do this. I'm going to order my kit and talk to you and do the whole thing. So I'm sold, but I'm also this is so freaking exclusive. And how much does it put people into fear around needing to know exactly who they are and what, how exactly everything's going to affect them, and actually take them away from their intuition of just being able to listen inside and how does this affect me? And maybe that's a little different than how this affects you. My husband can drink 4 times the amount of coffee than I can. I know that. I don't have to test for it. I know he must metabolize it differently than I do, because for me it turns into gastritis.
For sure. Those are really good points. I'm actually really glad you brought all that up. And I think that we're in an interesting phase right now of this technology where, yeah, a lot of it is expensive and a lot of it requires, time and, working with someone who really understands it. I have a vision of the future, hopefully, where this is something where it's much more accessible, where this is something that is when, you're born, you just have some genetic markers that you're aware of. Doctor comes in, takes the blood test, says, all right, yeah, you should probably avoid, saturated fats because you have an elevated risk for heart disease as you get older. And starting earlier is going to, prevent that. Now we know it. And so it's I think we're in an interesting phase where there has to be some way to start integrating it and start
right.
People. I'm with you there in that I'd rather see it more accessible than less accessible. So, it's a question of how to integrate that into people's general understanding. And, I think that epigenetics, you can look at it in multiple ways too. You can look at it from the extremely personalized perspective,
Yeah.
similar to the doshic system, where you're getting to specific genetic variables, like you were mentioning, like things that influence metabolism of, say, coffee, and then saying, well, is this going to be something that is beneficial for my heart health or not beneficial? And it's not necessarily reductionist. That's the only thing. It's just kind of the most striking thing about that gene. um, you can look at it from that perspective, or you can look at it similarly, I think, to a lot of the generalized Ayurvedic perspective that says, how are you relating to your environment? How are you looking at things from community and relationships, and just how are you interacting with the world, and look at these things that are common between people that's going to be beneficial. Like meditation is going to be good for pretty much everyone. There's not a gene that is going to tell you, yes, meditation, actually you shouldn't meditate because it's bad for you, right? So I think that you can look at these lessons that we're discovering in epigenetics and apply it in a general sense, to say, like, yeah, there's certain basic things that everyone can do to improve their health and improve genetic expression. And then you can take it a step further, and go, okay, well, now that I know these general things, what is my individual makeup, and what can I do from a personal perspective? And I think that there's the aspect of cost and expense, but also the aspect of just some people are more interested in that than other people.
Right. Well, and it sounds like there's a Moore's law component to that, where it's just going to get cheaper over time. Like now that the kids have more competition with each other, et cetera, that there's and there's all the lots of information on the web to interpret results and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But what about this though? So what about things like, we'll take weed and coffee, just because I started with those two examples, and I think those examples are so widespread, that it's like most people listening will probably have tried weed or tried coffee, and have had like a direct experience with something that has, when the coffee has like so many different antioxidants, right? It's got like 1,000 different antioxidants, and it obviously has a direct impact on adrenaline, and like it shifts the body. Weed, same thing. Like you're looking at something that's shifting, like in the Ayurvedic perspective. Both of these drugs shift the mind body, the manomaya kosha, like pretty quickly. There's a shift in there. So my question around intuition of, if someone's actually doing meditation and subtle body practices or yoga or Tai Chi or something where they're much more in touch with themselves, right? They're not just like, they're not going towards numbing experiences. They're going towards sensitivity experiences. How intuitional is it? I know my husband, his body does different things with coffee. And the more sensitive I get, the more aware I am that certain things happen with me with weed, for instance, for anyone listening that can just apply that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it, in a lot of situations, will confirm intuition, right? Like you've kind of already figured these things out. And, in a lot of cases, I see people go, oh yeah, oh, that makes sense. I know that this is true for me. But then in, a number of other cases, like I'll give you an example. I worked with a client who came to me who had like really bad sleep problems. He had tried everything. And, this was a guy who was a sound healer, therapist, into meditation, kind of, in tune with his body.
Clearly, sensitive.
And we did his genetics, and we actually found that he was a slow caffeine metabolizer. And he was drinking 1 cup of green tea in the morning. And when we took out the caffeine, because he just didn't think about that would possibly be effective.
And that's what, like 30 to 60 milligrams?
Yeah, not a ton. And so, and he's an extreme example, but I think that this type of analysis really works well for those outliers. For the people where kind of the average approach, or like, trying all the things that typically work, it can catch certain things like that and give you ideas. And then I'll kind of go on the other side of things in terms of being able to look at things that might not be accessible from an intuitive perspective so much, where you're looking, more at, say, B12 metabolism or B6 metabolism, that like, you might be able to kind of know over time, like if you have a B6 or B12 restricted diet, that, you're fatigued, but it can be hard to pin down exactly what those things are. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
certain genes you can look at that really do give certain people higher requirements of certain nutrients. And then that's something that oftentimes people will develop an intuition for once kind of they have that, into that knowledge and say like, oh, now that I know I should be paying attention to this, when I
Yeah.
do eat more liver or something that's high in B12, like I actually do feel a little bit better. But
Yeah.
it's something that can give you a little bit more of a shortcut to that sense of
Right.
like, I know what I should be
Right.
paying attention to now.
Yeah. And if you've never had liver like that, when you just said that, I'm like, oh, I so know I need more of that. But I
Mm-hmm.
grew up with liver.
Mm-hmm.
But if you didn't grow up with liver, your intuition might not even be honed enough to know what exists, right?
Right.
And so then
Exactly.
there's no connection. Okay. So I'm also curious about like our epigenetic coaches coming out of functional medicine. Like, is there a direct correlation between what's happening in epigenetic coaching and functional medicine? Because that's where I've seen the most, proactive community really looking at genetic markers and really looking at personalized diets based on those markers.
Yeah, there's definitely some functional medicine people kind of getting training in the epigenetic coaching kind of world. It's not necessarily exactly the same, and I think the main difference really is focusing, like functional medicine, is very much in the disease model of things. They're just looking at things from a different
Oh,
perspective.
okay. So it's not okay. Yeah,
Yeah, we're
that's good
really
to
trying
know.
to come at it from more of a wellness perspective, where we're looking at systems function in the body, and you know, of course, we're not throwing out the idea that diagnoses exist, but we're really trying to work from more of a looking at the relationships between different systems in the body and balancing the function of those things, rather than saying like, yes, you have this disease and we're gonna fix it and go from that perspective. I think they're complementary in ways, and I think certain people are going to be drawn more towards one or the other and be more effective for one thing or the other. Where if you can affect change in disease states from focusing on a wellness model, but I think it's kind of a different diagnostic approach in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and to me, the epigenetic conversation, it's such a generational one, right? Where we have, like when I'm talking with I had some genetic testing done, maybe it was a decade ago, because
Mm-hmm.
there's Lynch syndrome in my family.
Mm-hmm.
So and it came up, it was really fascinating, where my cousins made my aunt get the genetic, like see if she had the Lynch syndrome gene. And they were already adults, and they're like, Mom, just get, because their mom had cancer like at least 2 or 3 times. And then my dad had cancer at least twice. And they're like, let's just see. So she got tested first. My aunt tested positive for Lynch syndrome. So then my dad and his brother did the testing. My dad was positive, my uncle was negative. So then me and my siblings took the test and I was positive and they were negative. And it was really fascinating at this point, because now we're in the realm of genetics and epigenetics, right? Like we're solidly, no argument, there's no wiggle room. Like this is exactly what we're talking about. I have the gene and my siblings don't. And so I need to have a different type of, regimen with colonoscopies and endoscopies and whatever they're called, colposcopies and whatnot. So it's this like annual regimen, whereas like my siblings get off on like every 10 years or something, right? But talking with my dad was so fascinating, because he grew up in the paradigm of your genes don't change,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your genes are your genes and there's nothing you can do about it. And for the last 20 years as an Ayurvedic medicine practitioner, I'd be like, Dad, maybe not so much like coffee and, pasteurized OJ from the store every morning. Like, maybe bring some more plants into your life and into your diet. And, just not open at all to how behavior affects cells. And it was really fascinating too, because like anyone listening that has, parents or grandparents or friends or children in this mindset, it's such a different mindset, right? It's such a different mindset of genes are genes, and there's really nothing I can do to affect change. Whereas in epigenetic coaching, the whole thing seems to be framed of like, that's the name of the game.
Uh, Yeah, exactly. And I think what you said there, it's a generational thing, but it's not, coded. I work with, 70-year-olds that have got the
Oh yeah, I'm
message,
sure
right?
there's lots that are way more open than my father. Yeah, and
Yeah,
hopefully he'll
yeah.
listen. I'm gonna
No,
have him listen to this show.
my parents are like that too. So,
Are they? Oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
Um, maybe my dad a little bit more than my mom, but um,
Interesting.
yeah. But I think that's one of the things I love about it is it really does give people an empowering perspective over their health, where what you're describing in terms of having a gene that's associated with a higher cancer risk. Well, okay, what do you do about it?
Right.
There's so many things that impact the development of cancer. It's not just a single isolated gene. And I think that understanding really gives you the ability to look and say, all right, well, maybe I should look and see what all these other things are that do impact that, and
Yeah.
start thinking about things from this whole systems perspective, where everything I do in my life is going to influence genetic expression. And whether you take an Ayurvedic approach or you take more of, the epigenetic approach that's looking at individual genes, you're affecting genetic expression no matter what. Right.
Right.
And it's like, um, and what I love some of the studies that look at, Ayurvedic practices and look at some of the epigenetic changes that come directly from that. And it's like there's a lot of obvious wisdom that, even though they were developed without an understanding of that, we're really uncovering those changes. But what you're
Well, it
saying,
was
I
like
think
the
is
inner science lab, right, versus the outer science lab. So it's like there was this awareness. Even like Dr. Latt, he started talking. He's like a big Ayurvedic doctor, publisher,
Mhm.
or book writer, and he was talking about. I mean, I think some of the first epigenetic stuff I started reading from him was in the 90s, and he was basically saying like you can shift your constitution.
Mhm.
Just like if you really just deeply imprint. And we can see this in Olympic athletes too. Like we can see it in people who are just like so headstrong that they shapeshift their bodies, right, to have a certain reality. And you can see how much change is just, it's just behavior based, mindset based. And in my sense, like this, this core principle of yoga is Svatantriya, is freedom, right? That you're so free that you can do whatever you want with these elements. Like you can do whatever you want with ether and air and fire and water and earth. Like you can have, as and yes, there's tendencies, right? And that's the genome, right? There's these tendencies, but don't get locked into the mindset of you are your tendencies. Get
Exactly.
right, like frame that you're free, and tendencies might be challenges or opportunities. Frame it that way, and then design for what you want.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how much you go into like Vedic astrology in what you do, but I know like I love the quote from Yogananda that basically says like, okay, your personality, anything related to astrology is going to give you certain tendencies, but the more conscious and aware you are of those tendencies, the more ability you have to overcome that or change that or shift that, and you can make exactly what you're saying. That translates into all these other practices in the body. And even when you look more granularly or kind of reductionistically at some of the things that have been associated with the different doshic types, like there's certain similar genes actually to the caffeine metabolism genes that they've been identified that say certain doshic types have a higher percentage of this
Well,
genetic
I'm glad you're
variant.
going there, because that's
Um,
really where I wanted to go next. Was like it is because
well,
it seems like there might be enough of a correlation. Yeah, keep going.
yeah, there are correlations, but what we also know from the epigenetic piece, and this is kind of where I do a lot of work with my clients, is just because you have a certain genetic variant that say gives you a higher likelihood of metabolizing something slowly. Well, there's certain herbs and substances that we know actually upregulate those genes and turn them on, and
Yeah.
so that might be one kind of small little component of shifting your doshic type over time,
Well, that
or at
makes
least
yeah. Well, that makes
Mhm.
so much sense because there's so much long-term study in Ayurveda. I mean, like thousands of years. It's in the ancient texts on anupanas, which is how you deliver herbs, right? So it's like how you combine herbs is this herbal formulation, but then the delivery mechanism is built into that formulation so that it's like the activator, right? To actually activate the levels of tissue that you want. And if you look at that, you're looking at the nature of you're looking at the nature of the individual, and then you're looking at the nature of the dis-ease that's arising within the individual, and then you're looking at like which systems are most affected, and you're like take it all into account. So it's been super hyper personalized anyways. And then like, how are you going to get this to absorb? Like, how are you going to get this to work? Because it might not work the same in you as it will in me, right? So there's been some deep, whatever, I mean, just like deep work on this, which is why like going into like an Ayurvedic farm, like where they are actually producing Ayurvedic medicines in India is such a trip, because you see the stage by stage processes that have so much to do with combination and absorption. And just looking at like, how do you, and it's so different than Westerners. Like Westerners go and buy pills off shelves. They're like, I need slippery elm. So they'll go buy encapsulated like gelatin or the non-gelatin kind of capsules. And there's not a combination. There's not an understanding of Anyapana or absorption or individuation.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I could learn a lot from a lot of those practices just in terms of the way that what you're describing there. I mean, I think there's incredible wisdom that has not translated into this understanding. So, I
It's
look
cool
forward
though.
to,
It seems like they're both going on, right? Like we have this
yeah.
massive exploration into epigenetics, and we actually have this amazing history of how this work has been done with different language. Like, and I think that's maybe so much of the issue is terminology,
Uh-huh.
right? Like there's a different philosophy. So the terms are in a different philosophy in the East, where it's in holisms and dynamic systems, right? And in the West, where you have this reductionist, like piece by piece. And that goes all the way through the herb, right? So we're testing turmeric in the West, but we're not testing it with the herbs that it would naturally be combined with, or
Hmm.
the fat it would naturally be delivered in, and how the process it's made to make it more effective. You know what I mean? So it's like we're studying it. It's like what we do in the West. We're like, well, let's just take this little thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you is because like I know that I have a small piece of the puzzle in terms of really just human health in general. But when you could really combine it with some of the deeper wisdom there, I think it's a pretty powerful proposition to
Yeah.
move into
Well, and
future health techniques.
that's the thing, right? It's like the epigenetics testing is going to get so many more Westerners into a deeper understanding of who they are and their constitution and their, what they need to do, to feel great. That'll make them more aware, it sounds like. So so tell me a little bit more about, in terms of how just nutrigenomics works, like really people figuring out, or why don't you explain too, just what it is for people who
Yeah,
don't
sure.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you kind of two definitions, nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. There's a little bit of a distinction there. Nutrigenetics is the study of how your genes affect your nutritional needs. So say you have certain, like give you an example. There's a gene called BCMO1 that has to do with how your body converts beta carotene into retinol, the active form of vitamin A in the body. And so certain people are lower converters of that than other. And, might be a reason to eat more animal products that have the active form or to really load up on beta carotene. So that's an example of, just an enzyme that, some people produce more of, some people produce less of. And so you might need a different form of vitamin A, and you can adjust the diet based on all of these nutrigenetic kind of principles. And then nutrigenomics is actually how those nutrients in different types of food change genetic expression. And so that would be like, taking certain herbs to, like I was mentioning before, like boost the metabolism of, or upregulate the production of certain enzymes that change metabolism. And so, there's usually an interaction of both of those things. But you can get pretty precise in terms of saying, all right, we know you are going to have higher requirements for vitamin C and vitamin E. Here's some foods to incorporate. And we also know that you have some pathways in the liver that tend to be lower functioning. So here's also some foods, and here's some herbs that we know kind of shift the function of that, so you can metabolize these things better. So does that kind of help describe
Yeah.
those?
Yeah. So describe a little bit too, just like the testing and then the seeing the results of
Mhm.
those shifts in diet.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of the initial testing, we're looking at the base genome, which actually doesn't change. We're looking at the kind of core genetic variations that we know have associations with different factors, different predispositions, tendencies, and then as far as tracking changes over time, a lot of it is based on how people feel. A lot of it is based on tracking certain blood markers or other peripheral kind of things that we can pick up on and say we know that you have a gene that impacts, say, folate and B12, and more needs for that. We can look at certain blood markers that are associated with how your body is using those vitamins, or just track the vitamins themselves. But I like it when you can actually look at like the deeper function of certain
Right.
things,
Yeah.
and kind of track, over time how those markers change, and get a feel for, if you're kind of balancing out those core fundamental tendencies with the diet or not.
Okay. Got it. So when someone is, say someone's working with you, like what is the protocol in terms of, is it mostly blood testing after to see what is shifting?
It depends on the person. Some people are interested in tracking things. Some people are just interested in seeing how they feel and
Yeah.
going with
Feeling
that,
better.
right? And
Yeah.
I'm flexible. It's like whatever makes sense for the person. Some people are super geeky, biohacking kind of trackers, and I'm
Right.
always down to help with that. But it really depends. Usually, and the protocol will be nutritional at its core, but then there's all these kind of lifestyle factors, in terms of exercise, stress management, meditation, looking at just how you're living your daily life, and
Yeah. Yeah. Do
really
you want
taking
to
that into
talk about
account
the
too.
relationship with stress and epigenetics?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, it's kind of the core. I don't know, one of the core issues I feel like most people have, and you really see it. I think there's kind of the, what do you want to say? Like it's almost like a trope, or a like a stereotype, or something that like doesn't have much meaning, where say, yeah, stress is the cause of all illness, but you really can get into like these causative, like here's the science, here's exactly why stress is causing so many problems, and it really gives some like reasoning behind why people say that when you look at the epigenetics of it, just in terms of the way stress influences inflammation, and stress hormones, and all these things that you don't want elevated for the most part.
Yeah.
A little bit of stress is good.
Right.
You gotta have
Well,
the
let's
hormetic
no, let's
effect.
talk about it in terms of like adrenaline addiction, right? Because so like the
Hmm.
people that are just because that's what's happening now. It seems like in so many like on epidemic levels where people are just like, and I get it, like just kind of addicted to stimulants, like addicted to the feeling of being stimulated, and whether they're doing that through fear and worry, or whether they're doing that through ambition. Uh, I go more towards the ambition side than fear and worry. Although I can do fear and worry, but I would definitely default more to the pitta type, like the ambition type of just like
Hmm.
just trying to do too many things in a short period of time and not orienting from a place of ease through the activity of it. And then there's the, whether it's fear and worry or whether it's ambition, uh, often there's behaviors that keep that. I mean, in our Ayurveda, we would say the manomaya kosher, like the mental emotional body, like in a certain state, right? In a state of adrenaline, like in the state of
Hmm.
like, fight or flight, if you will, of just like, I gotta go. I gotta, I gotta in the adrenaline thing of like, there's a bear or there's a reason to act, not from a place of ease and creativity, from a place of like, there's consequences.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I
Right?
think, and yeah, you're really getting into a lot of the core psychological stuff here in terms of the way people are oriented and what coping mechanisms show up, right? In terms of, how am I moving through life, and is this, am I avoiding, really looking at who I am, and what's going on internally by staying busy all the time, and just, kind of dealing with existential dread or whatever it is by not, by distractions. um and yeah, I think like you said, it can definitely go in two directions. Where if you got the core, ambition kind of piece, or the fear and worry piece driving that, and certainly both can be interrelated. But yeah, I mean, I think no matter where you are on that spectrum, slowing down and really kind of centering and asking yourself those questions is helpful. And there's certainly things you can do from a nutritional or herbal perspective to kind of, maybe kind of put a wrench in
Right.
that cycle a little bit, so you have a little bit more space. But
Yeah. I mean, one of the
but
things
it,
I find, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, but ultimately, I think that's a self awareness psychological thing more than it is a physical thing. It's like you can make the changes from both sides, but ultimately, like if you want the long term changes, it's a more of a mental emotional game, I think.
Yeah. Well, there's two things there to me. Like one is the addiction part, right? Like the thing about addiction is it's hard to change on your own, right? It's like why AA is a group program where you're like, here's your mentor, here's your support group, here's your commitment, right? Is because it's like when we're in it, we like it. Like we actually are addicted to the fear and worry pattern or the ambition pattern. Like we actually like the feeling of being hyperstimulated. Is on some level, right? There's like the alcoholic likes alcohol on some level. There's this sense of like that's a yes and not a no. And same thing with weed, right? Like people that are trying to get off weed now is like I feel like the whole weed thing is going to be like this huge like trying to get off weed is going to become a huge market because so many people all of a sudden are like, wait, it's harder for me to get. It was easy to get on. It was harder for me to get off. Or coffee, right? For people that discover that through genetic testing or however, like this is not good for me. Like how do I get off? That's the hard part is that we're now in a phase where we can't just make a good decision. Like the addiction's driving the behavior, not the enlightened mind. So unless we're hanging out in environments that are stimulating the enlightened mind, good luck.
I mean, I like what you said. That is really actually a key, I think, is hanging out in environments that do recontextualize your relationship to things, whether it's, intentionally you're putting yourself in recovery or working with a therapist or just whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
even just, managing your social and friend group, to have that as a core piece. I do think it's interesting from an epigenetic perspective, just in terms of like what you're doing with your time and that relationship to those addictive behaviors. Like there was a study that was done, I think it was at UCLA in 2015, and they were looking at how people derived their happiness. Like if they were people that were more hedonic or eudaimonic, where the hedonic people were looking at, like, are you just going out and partying and, doing things for pleasure? Is that your main source of happiness? Versus they were looking at people that, were following their life's purpose and passion and actually getting more happiness from that side of things.
Yeah.
And they looked at epigenetic expression profiles and found that the people that were getting their life purpose, passion, eudaimonic kind of happiness predominantly had a better immune system profile, better expression of those genes. And so I don't even want to begin to like speculate on exactly how and why that shows up, but it's a really powerful and telling kind of
Yeah.
set of data, I think, to really ask yourself, all right, what are you doing with your life? Where are you getting that sense of reward or accomplishment? What's driving the dopamine system, right? Like
Yeah.
what's firing that off?
Well, in Ayurveda, it would just go to the subtle gunas of hedonists are going towards tamas. They're going towards a cloudiness of just like,
Mm-hmm.
it's often portrayed that way in movies too, of just like that sort of like wah wah, like watery, and where you sort of lose track of time, but it's murky and it's cloudy and you're kind of in a dream state, but you're not really that awake, versus sattva, which is like a very awake state. And they're on the opposite sides of the spectrum, and they're using energy in totally different ways. And it makes sense that, one of the things about the sattvic state in the mental gunas from Ayurveda is like in the sattvic state, you process things really quickly. So you use the energy available to more or less process patterns. So you
Mm-hmm.
continually become more a-patterned, right? Less in a genetic tendency, right? In this case, or like less in a mental samskara or an addictive pattern. You become more able to choose whatever's appropriate next, and less just in like this feels so good. I just want more of this. And I don't want, it's like people that have a hard time going to work on Monday because they've been totally numbed out all weekend. And then, right, they don't want to, they can't act outside of that fog. So then it's like slugging to work. That's sort of that's an evidence of tamas
Mm.
versus people who are living that, like you were saying, like that, what is it? Udanistic?
Uh, Eudaimonic. I think it's a Greek.
Eudaimonic.
Yeah, I think it's a Greek word, like the opposite of hedonism. Is
Oh,
kind
I
of
love it. I have
yeah.
so many new words from you today. It's so fun, David. But like people
Yeah.
that are in that eudaimonic, right? Like they're actually actively seeking growth and change. So there's
Hmm.
such a there's not a weight to it. There's just the gravity of wisdom. Like that's the only gravity in that is the gravity of wisdom. It's not like the gravity of like hedonism
Yeah,
or
and I think
addiction, right?
no matter whether you frame it from like an energetic perspective with those particular kind of energy states, sattvic or the tamas, like it shows up in the same way. We're just describing the same thing with different terms,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of like that's why personally I was initially drawn to epigenetics is
Mm.
because I've always had an appreciation for the energetic and for the holistic and like kind of at certain points have like wholesale rejected reductionist science, right? It's like it actually it's an interesting mechanism to kind of tie the energetic to the materialistic in a way. Like I think in a lot of ways is that interface between the mind and the body, or the physical and the spiritual, or however you want to phrase it.
Yeah.
It's this sort of just point of connection between these kind of different layers and spectra in a lot of ways. And that's why I'm so, passionate about that as an exploration.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it really seems to be the gateway for innovative allopathy to like find holisms, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it gives people an excuse to like not look at it like it's a woo woo kind of thing, to say like, oh yeah, everything you do with your life actually affects the rest of your life. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, did we really need that to say it? I don't think so personally, but it's a
right.
really nice. It's a nice way to kind of get under the radar of people who might be skeptical about stuff like Ayurveda, and
Yeah,
kind of give them a mechanism to look at.
yeah, yeah. All the people that read the like, what is that quack site? Like the quack
The
docs or
Quack
whatever.
Watch, yeah. Oh
Quack
well,
watch.
see, but the thing is, like, a lot of the epigenetic stuff makes it onto Quack Watch too,
Oh, does it?
right?
Oh,
Oh
okay, because it's
yeah,
too far
yeah.
ahead,
It's
even
too
though
far ahead. Yeah.
it's too far ahead. Huh. So, okay, so how do people work with an epigenetics coach? Like, or how do people work with you? If someone's listening, like, okay, this sounds cool. What do they?
Yeah. So I offer free 30-minute consultations to anyone that's interested, just to have a conversation and see if it makes sense to work together, see if we're a good fit, and kind of go over some different options. Some people are more interested in like just looking at nutrition, or just looking at exercise, or looking at the whole picture. So I have different options for that. And what
Oh,
we
great.
do from there is do a genetic test. It's a simple cheek swab test people can do and send off to our lab. And from there, we do an analysis, and then I offer ongoing coaching to help people integrate that information over time too. But it's really pretty non-invasive as far as testing goes. It's just something you can do at home. And
Yeah.
uh,
And is it similar? Like, if people have already, I know so many people have bought the whatever it is, the online ones on Amazon. I know they're always on those like Black Friday sales and
mhm.
whatnot. And so if they already have those, do they just send them to you? Is that how that works, or
It
is it
depends on
different?
which ones. So it matters whether I
Right.
can have
If they
access
did
to
the
the raw.
health one.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
it matters if I can access the raw data. Like for 23andMe, I can use that. Some of the testing services out there are more of kind of a black box thing where they're not giving you access to your raw data.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, so, if you
What
have,
are they doing with it? That's going to be a
right,
good, yeah, I bet you've asked that
yeah,
question.
yeah. So, yeah. It's also one of the reasons I use the testing that I use, because we're super careful about people's privacy and data ownership and everything like that.
And
Um,
so do you suggest that people use any of those kits or not? Like, is there one that you would?
I'm certainly biased towards the way that I work with people, because I
Yeah,
think that there's a real value to actually having, the interface of a coach and someone who's really
right.
familiar with the material that can actually talk to you, understand
Yeah,
your experience, and look at the genes through the lens of how am I actually making this make sense for this person. Because what
right.
happens, there's definitely been a huge rush to market, from a lot
Yeah,
of these companies to say, all right, we can get people to buy this. And
right.
some of them are not much more than that, unfortunately, um, because the genetics never give you absolutes. Like, it's
Mm,
very, like we were mentioning, it's always a matter of really looking at how all these things work together as a network, as interactions between things, and what the person's life experience has been like. And so without that piece of it, I
yeah.
don't know, I just don't see it as
It's like,
super
what's the
valuable.
point? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
for people who are thinking about doing that, it's like you're asking yourself, like, why are you doing it? And once you get to the why you're doing it, chances are you need a human being to talk to that's trained in it, that wants to help you. That's what
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
hearing
and
there.
yeah, and I mean, and certainly people can do the research on their own and figure out how it works. But I will
Yeah.
say the barrier to entry to do it really well is pretty high, because there's a lot of conflicting information on forums, and you really see. Um, yeah, it's like learning to speak a new language. It's helpful just to go to someone who can translate it for you, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. Awesome. Well, I'm psyched. We'll put all the links in the show notes, and so it's easier for people to get in contact. But David's website is David-Krantz, KRANTZ.com. And yeah, I would love, I'm just curious too, people from listening to this show, if you've got questions, email them to podcast@yogahealer.com. I'm really curious what questions might come out from this conversation that we just had. Awesome. Thanks so much, David. That was
Yeah, thanks for having me
awesome.
on. That was really fun.
Yay.